would like to turn the meeting over to Dennis, who has organized us in terms of presenting the pros and cons.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Let's see. When I talk to people about voting, and I get the response of, oh, you know, these politicians are all the same, they're all corrupt, why should I vote? Well, I always respond, we live in California. There's bound to be some wacky proposition that you're interested in that we can vote on. And so you should at least go to the polls to do that. So that's what we're talking about, is the propositions. Actually, by California standards, it's a fairly short list this year. As Janet mentioned, we are doing a lot of voter service activities, and I would really like to commend Jean Turner for accepting the role of voter service director for the Monterey Peninsula. She started off with good knowledge of the political process, but not about, and anybody who's been in the league has always heard this phrase, that's not the league way. So, but all she needed was just a little push in the right direction, and she's just been running with it. In fact, earlier in this season, there was a controversy over whether the league could present a forum in a nonpartisan manner, and the first place that we read about it or heard about it was not from the campaign or the campaign manager or the candidate complaining, but it was on the front page of the Herald. And I opened up the paper and I thought, oh, what are we going to do? And then I realized, oh, this is Monterey Peninsula. This is not my worry. We'll let Jean take care of it. And she never complained. So that was, it's wonderful to have you on board, Jean. Okay, a couple of things. First of all, there is a little bit of question among league members about how to best inform our fellow voters about the California propositions. Now, this one is called the Easy Voter Guide. It's has all of it devotes a half page to each of the propositions, and this is the one that the state league thinks we're going to distribute. So we got 1,000 of these, 750 in English, 250 in Spanish. The public libraries had the opportunity to order free copies of these also, so they are all covered. But if you know a place that you think would be convenient to have a stack of these for people to pick up, we have our 1,000 copies out on the desk. So when you leave, just pick up however many you would like, and I will hopefully be sitting there and I can record where you're taking them so that we can develop a distribution list for the future. A lot of league members think this is too thin, so they want to distribute pros and cons, which gives a whole page to each proposition. If the people that you may be distributing this information to are a little bit wonkier, then grab some of these. These are also out on the table. Now, the thing about the pros and cons is that we got to pay for these printing, so they're a little dearer. Now, for those who really like to get into the details, the league also produces what they call in-depth. And in the back of the handout that's on everybody's table, you'll see reference to the in-depth, which is on the League of Women Voters California. So you actually have 3 different levels of information you can access and send out. I'm also going to try a little experiment. After this meeting, I'm going to take the PDF versions of the Easy Voter Guide and the pros and cons, and I'm just going to attach them to a couple of emails and send them to all of our members. And what you can do with those is forward them to people you think would be interested in it. You know, this is coming from the league, it's nonpartisan, and this type of distribution doesn't cost anything. So we're going to try this and see if people like it or if it's just more clutter in their inbox. Okay, so today we have members of the board of the league board who are going to each speak about the propositions. They're supposed to only speak for about 5 minutes, but you know, sometimes it's hard to keep league members to that limit. And after each proposition, we will take questions. So today, it's going to be Janet is going to talk about Prop 1. George Riley, should I add the notorious George Riley, is going to speak on Prop 2. I'm going to speak on Prop 45. Sherry Maramis on 46. Gene Turner on 47. Max Chaplin on 48. And Diane Cotton on Measure Q. So we'll start off with Janet.
I'm speaking about Proposition 1, and the question is, should the state of California sell $7.1 billion in additional general obligation bonds to fund various water-related projects? This bond measure would be combined with previously approved bonds that have not been spent and would amount to a total of $7.5 billion. This pie chart is particularly important, and it describes where the money would be spent, which is the controversy and the particular project. 36% of the funds would go to dams and reservoirs, including expanding Lake Shasta. 20% of the funds would go for protecting rivers, lakes, streams, coastal waters, and watersheds. About 20% of these funds would go for watershed protection, with none scheduled for Monterey County. The remaining funds would be used for statewide programs to enhance stream flows, water restoration, conservation, etc. 12% would go for groundwater sustainability for statewide projects related to groundwater contamination of drinking water and projects for recharge of vulnerable high-use water basins. 11% would go for regional water security, climate and drought preparedness. About 60% would go to specific projects, including $43 million, which is about 8%, for the Central Coast Hydrologic Region, and statewide programs for water conservation and stormwater management. 9% would go for water recycling, and we heard just recently that MRWPCA, which is developing the Pure Water Project, thinks that it would be eligible for this funding. It has a project that's about ready to go. So these are statewide funds and are not earmarked. 7% would be for safe drinking water with a focus on communities that have poor drinking water and are not able to afford upgrades for theirs. 5% would go for flood management, with about 75% of that dedicated to protecting the levees in the Delta. And if you're familiar with the condition of the levees in the Delta, if there were a significant earthquake, those levees could collapse and jeopardize the whole water system in the state of California. About 75% of the funds are matching, which means those agencies requesting funding would have to provide some particular match. The bond measure was put on the ballot after a number of years of controversy, and previously the controversy has been that the bond measures were laden with pork. The measure that was put on the legislature and was initially Prop, I think 45 or 42 or 43, one of those. The legislature and the governor removed it, and that particular bond measure was for $11 billion. They came to an agreement and reduced that to 7.1 billion with fewer earmarked projects. Supporters say Prop 1 supports a comprehensive state water plan and provides a reliable supply of water for farms, businesses, and communities, especially during drought. Argue it does not raise taxes. Additional dams would allow California to store more water in wet years and better manage it in dry years, and would reduce reliance on groundwater. It would provide funds for disadvantaged communities for safe drinking water, invest in conservation and recycling, increase flood protection, and clean up groundwater. It would help protect rivers, lakes, and streams and provide for restoration of fish and wildlife resources. Opponents say too much of Prop 1 wrongly focuses on building dams. New dams would not add appreciably to our ability to store water, but would damage the environment while diverting funds from projects that hold the promise of restoring aquifers and creating true water security. No amount of water storage will produce more rain and snow. It does little for drought relief in the near term and doesn't adequately provide for water self-sufficiency or reduce reliance on the Delta ecosystem. The indebtedness would crowd out funding for projects like public schools and public health, while subsidizing storage and water purchases that mostly benefit a few agricultural interests. It would enable continued unsustainable exports of over-allocated water from Northern California and the Delta to San Joaquin Valley and Southern California. Supporters include the governor, California Farm Bureau, the Nature Conservancy, NRDC, and both of our U.S. senators. Opponents include the Southern California Watershed Alliance, Restore the Delta Organization, Food and Water Watch, Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen, and Center for Biological Diversity. So I am open to questions.
Would this completely fund the dams and reservoir projects, or would we have to add additional monies at some later point from some source?
The question was, would it fully fund the specific projects that are identified in the bond measure? The measure specifically talks about enlarging Shasta Dam, expanding Los Vaqueros Reservoir, building Sites Reservoir, and Temperance Flat Dam, and then there would be statewide programs. I'm not sure if the bond measure would fully fund those specific projects, and additionally 75% of all funds would have to receive a match from a requesting agency. So that's not specifically responsive to your question, but Beverly?
My understanding, there's been a lot of controversy over the Delta, the Griffith Canal, and the governor wanting to build additional. Would that part of construction be included in a section called dams? It's the Griffith Canal and all of that construction draining the Delta to feed the big corporate ag in the Central Valley is not supported by a lot of environmental and good government groups.
This is one of the areas of controversy, and it's my understanding it does not include specific projects for the peripheral canal or the tunnel. it would protect stream flows for fisheries that are in the Delta, but that was one of the controversies that was removed from the $11 billion that was previously on the budget, or on the ballot. Other questions? Darby?
I have a general question on process. It's my understanding that there's now a technique or a measure that when ballot measures, before they go on the ballot, they go through a committee to check wording and compromise and that sort of thing that hadn't been there before. Have you heard anything about that?
I think that was part of a previous bond measure, and I think that it was approved. Now, this bond measure was quite unusual because what was initially on the ballot was the $11 billion one, and it was put on by the legislature and the governor, and then they went and renegotiated it and got it down to $7 billion and substituted that for the one that the more costly one. That is why in your official ballot there, the one that just came, ballot information, the one that just came, it says there's no information on Prop 1 because it was submitted late, and you'll be getting a supplementary information sheet on that. Gail?
Yes, just going back to your pie chart, of the 12% that was used for the groundwater, or what they call it, groundwater sustainability, that is the only, as you explain this, that was the only reference to monies that were actually allocated for the Central Coast benefit.
The 12% is, all of that is for statewide. It's the 11% where 43 million is designated for the Central Coast hydrologic region, which would be Santa Barbara through Santa Cruz. And that's the only one earmark for this area. Larry?
Is there any money set aside or earmarked for desalination, for research, or anything?
No, unless it falls under sustainability.
If I can just add briefly to one of the questions, the money that's earmarked for the Central Coast area is a competitive, so you have to compete for the process, but we can be competitive on those. I'm speaking on Proposition 2. This is about a rainy day fund, and this is not a new idea. This was been talked about for years at the state legislature, and Governor Schwarzenegger in 2004 got approval for the first rainy day fund idea for the state budget. This is kind of round 2, but round 1 really didn't work very well. There were a lot of loopholes. The fund never got built up, was never used for the way that it was intended to, which is help pay down debt as well as have a reserve fund in place. And so California essentially has been operating with a very loosely worded commitment to a reserve fund because they spend everything they get. That's been their pattern. Rainy day fund is to avoid that. This chart is the personal income tax revenue to the state. Down below it's in the late 90s, and out to the far right it's today. So over maybe a 15-year period, we've had 2 recessionary economic turndowns in our area, but this is national as well. But for California, it's been a real structural problem because the dilemma at state government, it's not just California, but all over, but in California it's been pretty severe. When the revenue goes up, everybody's happy, and then they spend the money. The legislature's pattern to doing this. Then when there's a turndown, there's a recession, and the state has to worry about cutting staff and cutting programs, and we've had a number of propositions and lots of discussions about this over the years. It's happened twice in the past 15 years. Serious turndowns as shown by this graph. Should I say graft? Sorry about that. But the idea is to try to stabilize this up and down motion in the revenue stream. It's also a picture of our economy, a statewide economy. The dilemma at all state levels is when the going is good, everybody's happy. When the going gets bad, first of all, the state has less revenue and more demands on its own programs. Because in bad times, there's all the aid programs, all the worker comp programs, all the unemployment benefit programs, all those kinds of serving the needy are huge new demands on the budget, on state responsibility, and they don't have the money for it. So that's the nature of needing a reserve fund. The first time around, the concept was good, implementation was terrible. Now Governor Brown has finally gotten, and his whole administration has been focusing on the structural, economic, or the financial picture of the state. So what he's done is tried to stabilize this. Now this grant, this graft, excuse me, this graft is identical to the revenue stream that they're trying to tap and stabilize. Capital gains tax goes up in good times, comes down in bad times. It's been averaging, it's an identical picture of this, the numbers are different. What they're trying to do is draw a line on what's considered about average, and that will be the target to maintain a reserve fund, a rainy day fund. It's called a budget stabilization account. That's the technical term in Sacramento. So good time revenues goes up, bad time revenue goes down, but in good times, the need for the money, at least for these programs for the needy, those programs don't need the money as much, but then when times are bad, they need the money a lot. So just the opposite need for the money exists, just in the wrong cycles. So what they're trying to do is stabilize that. The whole idea is to force a commitment on the state, and that's why it's a constitutional amendment, is to force a commitment on the state to commit the capital gains tax to finance a reserve fund. And there are several, just pieces of this. And I don't want to go into details because that's basically it. It's to commit an annual amount of money into the fund. When the time is good, you put more money in so that when times are bad, you have that money set aside. It's a piggy bank. When the times are good and you have more money than you need, then the extra money that's going into that account is committed to spend down other obligations of the state. It's to spend down the pension debt. It's to pay for pension debt. It's to pay for intergovernmental debt that's been created in the meantime, and a lot of this are projects, school projects, construction projects, intergovernmental loans, but also payback to local governments and schools is in that category, and then infrastructure. So once you get the fund set up, and it'll take several years to build it up, but they've got a minimum commitment. It's to build it up, take probably 6 years or so to build it up. Once it's built up, more money will go to paying down the debt. The existing money will be used to cover the bad times. And if the revenue stream changes, then that means the amount of money that's available for some of the other commitments will fluctuate too. But the commitment is to force the structure of government to be different. It's to force a rainy day fund. And it's to finance it, but from a revenue source. They've tacked it onto the revenue source that is just as fluctuating as this curve is, so that in good times you reserve it, in bad times you have it available. The opposition largely, there are a lot of people all over the states very much in support of this. The opposition comes from essentially some school groups who feel like this was an opportunity to restore the commitment to school funding, because the state now is responsible for almost all of school funding. Not all of it, but a huge chunk of it. And they felt like this was an opportunity to make a commitment to restore school funding, and they didn't take that opportunity to do that. So that's still an unaddressed issue at the legislature. But the only opposition that's coming from this are school groups saying, you missed your chance to do something good for us, therefore we don't like it. It's a weak argument, but that's the pros. That's the con. Short questions.
You said it came from capital gains tax, not just income tax?
Only capital gains tax, yes. Yes.
What protections does this provide for workarounds to get the money that sits there, because pots of money are irresistible?
It's defined on how they use the funds, which is to essentially pay down debt. First of all, it's to create the piggy bank. And then after the piggy bank, what's on top of that is committed to three categories of expenditures. Pension debt, pay it down. Other intergovernmental debt, pay that down. And infrastructure needs, add to paying the debt on infrastructure. It's still paying down the debt. The walk-arounds will probably Still exists if it's severe. The protection here is that the legislature does not have access to this. They do if the governor declares a statewide emergency. There are two ways he can do that. A natural disaster is one, and then some other unique fiscal emergency. But the governor has to trigger it. The legislature cannot do it on their own. So you got to get two bodies to agree to something. You can't just depend on the legislature. That's where the graft comes in, I think.
Okay, I'm going to be speaking about Proposition 45, which is authority over health insurance rates. The general situation, 77% of California workers are covered by large group and government health care plans. 16% are covered by individual plans. In other words, individuals buy plans directly from an insurance company, and small group plans, which is 50 people or less, and about 7% are uninsured. The rates are reviewed by a couple of state agencies. One is the State Department of Health Managed Care, and another one is the Department of Insurance. But neither of those agencies have the authority to reject or change health care rates. Now, Proposition 103 a few years ago created the elected office of Insurance Commissioner, and this office was given the authority to review and reject rates for automobile insurance and homeowners insurance. Proposition 45 essentially is to expand that person's authority to health care rates. The way in which this authority would be exercised with appeals available and things like that would be the same as is now in place for automobile insurance and home owner's insurance. Now, the arguments for this is that people point to Proposition 103 and say that it's done a lot to keep a damper on car insurance, which was the big complaint when it was passed, and that they feel like the same could be done for health care rates. The opponents say that this just adds another layer of bureaucracy, and that authority over health care rates should not be given to a politician. Now, interestingly, there's another player in all of this. You've all heard of Covered California, and this is an independent state agency whose responsibility is basically implementing the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. They are interested also in the 16% of individual health care plan owners and small group health care. They've been doing a really good job. They've reduced the number of uninsured by a half. However, they do not have authority to reject rates. Basically, what they've done is taken all of the companies that do business in California, forced them to come up with somewhat standardized plans that offers similar levels of coverage, and then presented them on a website where people can easily compare rates and such. Their board has spoken out against Proposition 45, but it's not known whether they feel like the insurance commissioner should not have this authority, or whether they would like to have the authority themselves someday. But when you hear about, and they have been advertising, talking about this independent commission that opposes Prop 45, that's who they're talking about, is Covered California. So you have this interesting situation of two state agencies arguing with each other. You can find the list of people who support or are against the measure, but what I always find more interesting is who's contributing money to the campaign. In the four is, first of all, is Consumer Watchdog Campaign. This is basically a public interest a law group that also created Prop 103, and so you can see they have a very political point of view. The California Nurses Association also contributed some money, and arrayed against them are the major health insurance companies. So that pretty well defines the line there. Okay, so that's all. Are there any questions? Sherry?
Yeah, I heard the insurance commissioner having the control over setting price costs would interfere with the Affordable Care Act.
The question is that there's been argument against Prop 45 by saying that it's going to really complicate the actions of Covered California, in that all the plans have to get put together by a certain time and then put out there at the same time. And with this insurance commissioner out there changing the rates or rejecting rates, it's going to cause some companies to not be able to offer their plan this year. They would have to wait for the next year, and that would reduce competition and various other things. That is an argument that they've made. And as we've seen how poorly these two agencies have worked together, that may be a problem. The proponents of 45 point out that in more than 30 states, some insurance commissioner already has this authority, and they're able to work with the implementers of the Affordable Care Act just fine. So anyways, those are the two arguments. Anything else? All right.
This proposition, we are not creating another bureaucracy. We are going to make use of the existing insurance commissioner's office.
Sylvia was asking about that they would not require more expense. Another department, that's correct. No, it would not be another department, and the process is already in place. They would not have to be reinventing the wheel. Thank you for that clarification. Yes. Anything, one more?
Can you just repeat where the money, who's funding which side?
Let's see. The proponents of the of Prop 45, the people who drew it up and got it on the ballot, is called Consumer Watchdog Campaign, and they put in $1.5 million. And then the California Nurses Association put in $1 million. And then Kaiser Foundation put in about $15 million against. Let's see, WellPoint, let's see, $13 million against. Blue Shield of California, about $10 million against. So, anyways, if you want more numbers, I will, at the end, I'm going to give you some references where you can look up the political contributions as they come in. One last one. Joy.
What's going to drive doctors out of California?
What's going to drive doctors out of California? We're not sure. People have their own opinions, but you don't really know unless we start surveying doctors, and then 2 years from now we survey them again or see where they are. Okay, next up is 46.
I'm presenting on Proposition 46. The first information I'm presenting is what Proposition 46 would do. First, it would require random drug and alcohol testing of doctors, drug and alcohol testing after events of possible medical negligence, or if the doctor is suspected of using alcohol or drugs. Hospitals must bill the physician for the cost of the tests and not pass any of the testing costs on to patients or their insurers. Number two,
Require the Medical Board of California to take necessary disciplinary action against a doctor who tests positive for alcohol or drugs while on duty. 3. Require licensed healthcare practitioners and pharmacists to check the state's Controlled Substance Database, known as CURS, prior to writing a prescription for certain controlled drugs for a first-time patient. If the patient already has that prescription, the physician must determine if there's a legitimate need for prescribing that drug again. Raise the current cap of $250,000 on non-economic damages, which has been in place since 1975. It would raise it to $1.1 million and index it to inflation going forward, effective January 1st of 2015. By way of explanation, there are two kinds of damages in malpractice cases. There is no cap on economic damages, and that's for the financial cost of an injury, such as medical bills and loss of income. Non-economic damages are awarded for pain, suffering, and loss of quality of life. The following are the positions of support put forth by each side. Proponents' positions. Number 1, holds doctors accountable for negligence and detects and holds doctors accountable for negligence while impaired by drugs or alcohol. 2, doctors will be required to check the CURS database before prescribing addictive painkillers and other narcotics to a first-time patient. 3, increasing the cap on non-economic damages for pain and suffering fairly values lives. 4, pilots, school bus drivers, truck drivers, flight attendants, train engineers, and other occupations are already drug tested. The opponent's positions. Number 1, malpractice lawsuits and trial attorney awards will skyrocket and government and the public will pay the costs. 2, if medical malpractice awards go up, health insurance companies will raise their rates to cover the increased costs, and we will all pay more in health care premiums. 3, state and county hospitals pay their own medical malpractice insurance premiums. When insurance companies raise their rates, state and county governments have to find a way to cover the new costs. 4, Proposition 46 mandates doctors consult the state's online database of a patient's personal prescription drug history. This database is controlled by the state in an age when it is already too easy for government to violate our privacy. The next is the information as a result of the legislative analyst's assessment of the physical effects of 46. 1, drug and alcohol testing of doctors would likely result in fewer medical errors with the costs paid for by the fee assessed on physicians. 2, raising the cap would likely increase total health care spending by 0.1% to 0.5%. 3, increased costs due to changes in the provision of health care services due to raising the cap was estimated to result in an increase of 0.1% to 1% in costs. 4, the estimated state and local government health care costs associated with raising the cap would likely range from tens of millions of dollars to several $100 million annually. The state portion of these costs would be less than 0.5% of the state's annual general fund budget. 5, the requirement to check CURS enables providers to more easily identify potential doctor shoppers, resulting in a reduction of prescription drugs dispensed. This would likely result in lower prescription drug costs related to prescription drug abuse and lower governmental costs associated with prescription drug abuse. The amount of annual savings is highly uncertain, but potentially significant, and would offset some of the increased governmental costs from raising the cap on non-economic damages. In terms of the money raised, Proponents as of 9/3/14 have raised $1.9 million. Donations came from 2 organizations and 8 plaintiff law firms. The opponents as of the same date have raised $90.1 million. Donations came from 5 insurance companies, 4 medical associations, and Kaiser Permanente. Questions? Janet?
Are there any data describing what the problem is that is addressed by this proposition? With respect to, like, how many vendors are...
There are some estimates, but they're basically just described as estimates, and the ones that I could find did not reference how that information was collected, where it was collected. Is that an entire country? You know, is that the entire United States in terms of percentage being referenced? So for that reason, I didn't include that information because I didn't know what it really meant about it. Yes.
Somewhere my understanding was that this setup of the doctors is cover-up to get people to vote for it, when the real issue is raising the malpractice lawsuit limit. And that's why the lawyers are for it and the insurance companies are against it.
Well, clearly this proposition contains both of those things, raising the non-economic damages in medical malpractice cases and instituting drug and alcohol testing of doctors and checking the database. That's all part of the same bill. I know in looking at the information that one of the opponents' positions was that this is just sort of a sneaky way of adding the drug and alcohol testing was just sort of a sneaky way of getting an increase in the non-economic medical malpractice damages. However, that damage limit of $250,000 has been in effect since 1975 with no increases for inflation. And I think one of the other arguments, and I couldn't present all of them, was that with that kind of limit on damages, since plaintiff attorneys basically are paid based on the damages received in a malpractice claim, people weren't being able to get attorneys to represent them because it's simply not enough money to warrant representing somebody because the costs are so high in those kinds of cases. Yes?
To me, this is an illustration of why we need reform of the initiative process. It seems like it's 3 initiatives and not one.
Mm-hmm.
And they're forcing people to weigh things that what are supposed to be just single issue initiatives.
The malpractice attorneys part, the increase from MICRA, does that section also change the way attorneys are compensated, the percentages, or how much of a judgment they can take?
No, that remains unchanged in this. Yes, it remains the same. Any other questions?
I'm puzzled as to why the legislature couldn't deal with these issues, at least one of them individually, or why we have to go through a statewide review of it. Do you have any history on that? Why this is on the ballot?
Well, I think part of the impetus for this measure being on the ballot at this point is as a result of a gentleman who lost 2 children to a driver impaired by alcohol and drugs. Well, yes, it's referred to as the Troy and Atlanta PAC Patient Safety Act of 2014, and that was that was Bob Pack's. That's a result of his loss of those 2 children. Yes.
Thank you, Sherry.
Yeah. Thank you.
Proposition 47 is an initiative on the November ballot Its purpose is to relieve overcrowding in the California state prison system. Under the California State Penal Code, there are 3 types of crimes: felonies, misdemeanors, and infractions. Infractions would be like speeding, where you pay a fine and that's it. A felony, the most serious crime, there are 2 different types. Some graded as violent or serious, and such as murder or rape. Others classified as nonviolent, such as grand theft and possession of illegal drugs. Convictions for felonies result in incarceration for at least 1 year, usually in a state prison facility rather than a county jail. After release, the felony offenders are supervised by state parolee agents or county probation officers. Misdemeanors are less serious crimes, such as petty theft and public drunkenness, usually resulting in fines or incarceration in a county jail. Some crimes referred to as wobblers, which was new to me, are crimes that could go either way depending on the defendant's background. If this is a person who has committed serious crimes before, the public defender's office is more apt to look upon this as a felony rather than a misdemeanor. So a wobbler can go any way depending on the defendant's history. So, how did California's state prisons become so crowded? California's prison population grew to twice its design capacity as a result of the 1994 three-strike sentencing law, which imposed a 25-year to life sentence for anyone convicted of a 3rd felony who already had 2 previous convictions for violent or serious felonies. In July of 2011, the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, ruled that overcrowding in California prisons was unconstitutional, resulting in a federal mandate to reduce prison overcrowding to 137.5% of capacity by February of 2016. As of last August, it was down to 140% due to passage of a few laws. Initiatives to reduce penalties for non-serious, non-violent crimes have been on the ballot before. Prop 36 was passed in November of 2012. That revised the 3 strikes law to permit resentencing for 3rd strike felons serving life terms for a 3rd strike that was not serious. Laws have also been approved and signed by the governor to ameliorate overcrowding in state prisons. Assembly Bill 109, the realignment law, was signed in 2011, and that allowed movement of prisoners having committed less serious crimes to county jails. Prop 47 allows felony sentencing if previous convictions for rape, murder, child molestation are not in play. It would reduce the penalty for most nonviolent felonies and wobblers to misdemeanors unless the defendant has a prior conviction for a violent or serious crime. And the misdemeanors include certain drug possession offenses. This is what got a lot of 3rd strike people into state prisons. They had served their time for their first 2 felonies, and then they were caught with 2 ounces of marijuana. And that was the 3rd strike, and into a state prison they went. Following crimes where an amount involved is $950 or less: petty theft, receiving stolen property, forging or writing bad checks. Would also permit resentencing for anyone serving a prison sentence for these reclassified offenses. So the idea is that if these people are not a threat to society, why are we spending $47,500 a year to house them in state prisons? We spend $8 billion a year on state prisons right now. So the fiscal effect would be a net savings estimated in the low hundreds of millions of dollars. The initial cost would be in the resentencing hearings. Savings in cost of housing prisoners would more than make up for that. 25% of the savings would be for grants aimed at reducing truancy and K-12 dropouts, 10% for victim services grants, and 65% to support mental health and drug abuse treatment services designed to keep individuals out of prison. Supporters say that Prop 47 will reduce spending and waste from current incarcerations of those convicted of low-level nonviolent crimes. Money saved would go into Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Fund. That's what you read a lot about now, to be used for the truancy and dropout prevention, and it would also be used, as mentioned, for assistance for victims of crime, mental health programs, and drug treatment services. Supporters, the three names that put this on the ballot were George Gaskin, who is a San Francisco district attorney, William Lansdowne, former chief of police of San Diego, San Jose, and Richmond, Dion Wilson, victims advocate, crime survivors for safety and justice. It's supported by the California Teachers Association and American Federation of Teachers, the AFL-CIO, and the National NAACP. As of August 21st, when some of the money was turned in, the records were turned in, according to our in-depth league information, major financial contributions in favor were $3.2 million. Open Society Policy Center, Public Storage is in favor. Atlantic Philanthropies, Netflix. Kid you not. An American Civil Liberties Union of Northern California. Opposition. Opponents say that if this initiative is passed, that thousands of dangerous inmates will be on the loose. This is quoted from the ballot information we were sent at home. Judges would be prevented from blocking early release of prisoners, overcrowding of jails by those who would be in prison, and courts jammed with resentencing hearings. And yes, there would be resentencing hearings. So the opponents are Christopher W. Boyd, president of the California Police Chiefs Association, Harriet Salerno, president of Crime Victims United, and Gilbert Otero, president of the California District Attorneys Association. Those against are California District Attorneys Association, California Fraternal Order of Police, and California Police Chief Association, California Victim Action Alliance. And as of August 21st, only $8,000 had been collected against this initiative. $5,000 from California Police Chiefs Association, and $3,000 from California Correctional Supervisors Organization. So that's where we stand. Any questions I can answer? Bev?
Well, I don't have a question, I have a comment. I think nationwide, beyond the three strikes law in California, the war on drugs throughout this country has been a horrendous failure. And it has criminalized activity which is not dangerous to the public. So I think that in terms of making possession of illegal drugs a misdemeanor, I'm all for it.
Yes, Catherine.
Just want to mention one other group that's opposed, that's for Proposition 47. It's Californians United for a Responsible Budget, and they're engaged with prison reform in the state. And although they're for it, they have some reservations, concerns, because it puts the projected savings back into the budgets of law enforcement instead of into their communities, such as housing,
but it is a positive step forward, and it would cause maybe other states to follow suit in that step.
Thank you. Who else? Ellen?
Yeah. Just wanted to mention that I went online and got the progressive vote, how progressives are voting. All of these checks, right straight down the line, of people who are part of this proposition. As the California NACP, as well as the national and our local NACP, is working for this proposition.
Which goes right back to the war on drugs that Bev mentioned. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, Prop 48.
Well, Max is first going to tell you that he feels very fortunate to have this particular one. It doesn't have an ethical consideration in it. It's strictly money. That's what Prop 48 is about. This is known as the Indian gaming proposal. It would allow state compacts with the North Fork and the Wiyot tribes to go into effect. For North Fork, it would permit construction of a casino near Highway 99 in Madera County, and for the Wiyot, they would give up rights to construct a casino on tribal lands in Humboldt County, and in exchange would receive a percentage of the revenue from the North Fork Casino. This is estimated at about $6 million annually. The fiscal impacts of this proposition are that is estimated annual payments of by North Fork to state and local governments in Madera County are about $10 million. Supporters of the proposition say, well, the casino has local support and would create 4,000 jobs. And they say the casino would bring revenue to Madera County. Local, state, and federal officials support the casino's location. Opponents say the deal breaks the promise that Indian casinos would only be built on original reservation land. And they contend that rather than creating new jobs, casinos would take jobs and resources from nearby areas. Now, contribution. As of September 24th, was less than $380,000 for Prop 48, whereas $6.5 million, mostly from gambling interests, was raised against the proposition. The endorsements for Proposition 48, Governor Brown, California Democratic Party, California Labor Federation, Chair of Madera County Board of Supervisors, Chair of Madera County Chamber of Commerce, the Sheriff of Madera County, and the Los Angeles Times. Against individual Madera and Fresno County supervisors, the California Farm Bureau Federation, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Sacramento Bee. Interesting, but much of supporters in opposition. But it does present no major ethical issues.
Why is the proposition in front of the voters? Why couldn't the governor say yea or nay, just like before?
I think it's the Secretary of State had some reservations about whether this kind of an act could be taken by the governor on his own or by the state government alone. So it was referred to the ballot. Originally, it was a standalone issue, but it was referred to the ballot.
Max, did you come across any information as to why the Indian group involved in this decided it was a better deal for them to give up the right to build this on their own reservation and put it in Madera County instead?
I ran across no specific comments on that, other than to note that apparently in Humboldt County there was a strong public feeling against casinos. They have none up there, and they didn't want it. Apparently, a number of people didn't want to see any. Janet?
My understanding is this is a precedent-setting
referendum in that it would allow gambling in non-Indian reservations. So from that perspective, and that's one of the arguments again.
If you weren't Indian, why this would be an issue?
Well, it's the question of the location of this casino is a gold mine, because most of the other casinos, with the exception of Southern California, are well off major highways. And this would be right on a major highway, and that's why it's potentially a big earner.
It potentially has an impact here as well, because if you're allowed to have gambling off of reservations or Indian land, then conceivably there could be a casino on Cannery Row.
Well, to me, the most important thing you said in the beginning was there are two tribes, the North Forks and the Wyatt. The Wyatt are in Humboldt, in a tiny little place up in the, what does it say?
It's just out of your region.
In the forest, where we wouldn't really want it turned into a casino. Nobody would. It's the natural area. It's part of, it's right next to a park. What does it say here? It says it's in the Sierra National Forest. And that's the Wyatt's land. So the question, so if they had gotten to do what they legally can do, the Wyatts would have a casino in the National Forest, and the other ones would have their casino in Madera. Brown got the Wyatts to agree to take a share of the Madera casino and not build on their own land. That's what you just said. And
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so I think that's getting lost here, is that we're one casino less if the Wyatts are not allowed now with this agreement to build on their own land.
It was from reading, I assumed that the people in Humboldt County would be difficult neighbors if they tried to put a casino in there.
Calkins, in his Monterey County Carson blog, points out that there really are some very wide-ranging implications for this. And it's interesting that in Monterey County, we have an Indian group currently going around trying to get grants of like 50 acres on Fort Ord. And this potentially could allow Indian gaming on Fort Ord.
Well, as Janet pointed out, this breaks down a former limitation on this whole idea of casinos. Supposedly, the license to build casinos ran out, and there never was a license to build casinos except on your land. So this opens the door to some potentially, and particularly in the case of, say, Monterey County, that's dynamite.
Okay, thank you, Max. We're going to move on to Measure Q, because I want to ride the bus.
Hello. Measure Q is a Monterey County tax ordinance. The question is, shall Monterey Salinas Transit, also known as MST, provide, maintain, and protect transit services for Monterey County senior citizens, veterans, and people with disabilities? The trips that these senior citizens, veterans, and people with disabilities have been taking have been vital medical appointments, as well as veterans' jobs training and placement services. The measure proposes a tax of 1/8 cent per dollar on gross retail sales from retailers in Monterey County. Funds are to be used for transportation services for veterans, seniors, and disabled persons. The measure provides for an oversight committee. There will be an annual audit. The ordinance will be in effect for 15 years, and the voters must approve any changes. A yes vote from 2/3 of the voters will procure this tax ordinance. The situation. State funding has been cut in recent years, and the federal government is eliminating a number of transit programs that assist seniors and the disabled. A grant program to assist veterans has expired. The California Public Utilities Code, Section 106060, authorizes MST to levy local transactions and use sales tax, which is subject to voter approval. So here we are. The fiscal effects. $100,000 spent by MST for public information and ballot measure development activities. $250,000 is the cost of placing the measure on the ballot. And $2,080,000 tax to be collected and spent each year on the 2013 Monterey County sales receipts. So as of last year, if we had this tax, we would have earned over $2 million. MST would have earned over $2 million. Supporters say, and I quote, "This small sales tax, 1/8 cent on every dollar, will create a stable source of local funding used exclusively to protect transit services for seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities." Number 2, the federal government eliminated and dedicated funding for vital transit programs for veterans and persons with disabilities. The state or federal government cannot take the local funding. Number 3, MST provided more than 500,000 rides in 2013 to veterans, seniors, and people with disabilities, enabling them to get to important medical appointments. And I eliminated some of the other arguments due to time and advice. Opponents also quoted, 1, in addition to this measure, the ballot has many other local tax generating measures that the public cannot afford. 2, MST spent $100,000 of taxpayers' funds to research the feasibility of this tax measure. Number 3, this tax is just another attempt to spend more money. This is quoted. MST has been seeking more office space and facilities and newer buses that are usually less than half full, and MST spent $4.5 million on the design of the failed Whispering Oaks Transit Center. Supporters for the ordinance are Amy White of Land Watch of Monterey County, Fernando Armenta, Mary Ann Leffel, Sid Williams, Burl Gish, and opponents are Eugene L. Lee, Mary V. Larkin, Rosemary Bruno, Lawrence Samuels, and Jane O. Hyder. Any questions? Yes.
Well, I came up here on one of these vouchers that I had. And obviously, this is not a medical visit, but I was able to pay just $3. It's limited. But they told me, they sent me a letter, because I was doing this in my residence place. They told me that they were going to cut it out completely for people like us in December. And they've already cut the vouchers that are available to them. I don't know what to think of this. I can come up here on my own with a taxi. But for these people that have medical appointments, that cannot, I'm beginning to see how many medical appointments one can have.
Any other questions? Yes, Helen.
From listening to, because I didn't read this very well, this will not add any services to disabled. As I get older and know that I must pass that driver's test in a few years, it really bothers me about how I'm going to get around if I lose my license. So I'm very interested in this, and I don't know that they will add, this tax will add any services. It will just keep the services that are already here. In other words, if it doesn't pass, services for disabled veterans and seniors are going to go out the window. Is that right?
the tax is to continue the services we have, which are many for the elderly and for veterans and for people with disabilities. I know that I don't remember the names of the particular programs that MST has had, but they will even pay a taxi cab to help get those populations to the places they need to go. And I do know that veterans often have to go to Palo Alto for the VA services, and that they get bus passes to do that, that they even can transfer the buses. So those are current services that are there that they do want to continue with this money.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's thank all the speakers.